A real standout for the PlayStation launch titles was Ubisoft's bold and bright platform adventure Rayman, ported to a grand total of 12 different systems, including the Palm OS and even an eventually cancelled version for the Gizmondo, which, if you've never heard of, was a short-lived little handheld from the mid-2000s with a fascinating history, which I'm definitely going to have to look at one day. Anyway, I digress. It also found its way onto 3 consecutive generations of Nintendo handhelds. There was a downgraded export to the Game Boy Color, this advanced version that more closely resembled the original, and then later on a DSiWare version. This GBA version of number 1 came out before the Game Boy Color version of Rayman 2, which might give you an idea of the timeline and the crossover in console generations that was going on at the time. Incidentally, that GBC game wasn't really based on the original Rayman 2, but was its own game. In fact, number 2 never made it to the GBA in any form, but that's not to say Ubisoft didn't get the most out of the franchise here. Rayman 3 had a release, again a bit different from the console versions, and there'd be 2 releases in 2005, a 10th anniversary collection, as well as a unique game called Rayman Hoodlum's Revenge. Now, as a platforming mascot/hero, I always found Rayman to be a bit unlikable. Whether that was the cringeworthy voice samples, the jazz hands, or simply just the kind of uninspired character design, I don't know. Oddly, he sort of fits on the Game Boy Advance though. If you remember Pinobi, for example, he's less irritating to me personally than that guy was. Rayman does star in some pretty cool and thoroughly playable platformers though, which of course is the main thing. Besides, the rest of the graphics are really well done. If you can think of a color, they've probably used it somewhere in these backgrounds, which granted doesn't always work, but here it's pretty well measured, and none of the foreground detail gets lost or confusing like in some other early GBA games. The enemies are cartoonish and humorous, and offer up lots of really smooth animation. You can see why the game appealed to its younger audience, and the gameplay ensured even older ones would be into it. It's the grand old platformer storyline, of course, nothing new here in that regard. Mr. Bad Person/Thing has stolen all the such and suches that stop your protagonist's home from falling into chaos, and you, as said protagonist, must go around collecting them and beating baddies along the way. In this instance, the stolen thingies are called Protoons, and there are 7 cages full of them per each stage for you to find. You need to puzzle out the location of all 7 of them in each collection of levels to beat the game. But once a stage is completed, you are able to revisit it as much as you want to find what you're missing. Exploration is in fact crucial right from the first level, with some of these cages being really well hidden, and in fact you can't access everywhere until you've found this fairy called Betilla, who periodically grants you powers. At first, you can't even attack anything until you beat a couple of sub-stages and get blessed with the ability to punch. Later on, you'll learn the ability to hang on to platform edges, hover after jumping, and sprint, all of which will let you get to places you previously couldn't. Along the way, there are loads of pickups. The blue ball things give you an extra life should you find 100. Health balls replenish hits but can also extend your health bar, and a golden fist makes Rayman's punches hurt more. Enemies are varied in their patterns. Some seek you out, whereas some meander their set routes. Some are quite nimble and can dodge your punches, but thankfully you can power up your fist, release it quite far, and hit things from behind on the return swing. The attacking mechanic is actually quite fun once you get into it. It can be tricky to use sometimes, not so much when fighting enemies, but sometimes you'll see these giant purple fruit-looking things that you need to punch down. You then often need to punch them in a certain direction to knock them onto spikes, trap enemies in them, or push them into water to then use as platforms. If you miss it with your outgoing punch, you can easily accidentally hit it from the other side, and the fruit will just fly off in the opposite direction to what you intended. Even the best platformers often have 1 or 2 of these irritating little things about them, and this is one of Rayman's, admittedly, very few. Level design is excellent, with each world bringing new elements to the party. Pretty well measured too. Once you start to feel the levels are getting a bit repetitive, that's usually around the time when the game changes it up and you're thrown into a brand new environment. Unlocking all the levels isn't that arduous a journey, and you can do so in a couple of hours. All you need to do is to get to the exit or to beat the boss. However, it is a long old game if you wanted to 100% it, with each level needing to be searched thoroughly to get all the cages. Nothing's massively difficult, which might not be to everyone's tastes, but Rayman Advance is plenty accessible for anyone, regardless of skill level. Look, if I can beat it, so can you.